Welcome to the Information Systems for Business podcast. The main purpose of the podcast is to augment the book Information Systems for Business, An Experiential Approach, 5th edition, by Frans Belanger, Craig Van Slyke, and Rob Crossler. The book is published by Prospect Press. I'm your host, Craig Van Slyke. This episode is for the 5th edition of the textbook. Before we get started, I wanted to give a couple of disclaimers. The podcast purposely omits many details to get to the high points of each chapter, so listening to the podcast is not a substitute for reading the book. Each episode contains my view of the most important points of each chapter. Your professor may have a different view of what's important. The podcast is solely my responsibility, so any errors are on me, not my co-authors, your professors, Prospect Press, or my employer. All right, enough with the disclaimers. Let's get to the good stuff. This episode covers the high points of Chapter 13, Gaining Strategic Value from Information. The focusing story for Chapter 13 is about mobile health, which is sometimes called mHealth, which offers healthcare services through mobile technology such as smartphones. mHealth has many uses, including compliance, making sure patients follow their medical plans, information dissemination, and monitoring, such as measuring sleep habits. mHealth is already changing the healthcare landscape, but bigger impacts are on the horizon. One day, it'll be pretty common to consult with a doctor without ever leaving home. Information is one of the most valuable assets a company can have. This is obvious for some companies like Google and Facebook, but it's also true of non-tech companies, although I'm not sure there is any such a thing these days. Virtually all companies rely on technology to some extent. This chapter introduces the idea of strategic information systems, which are information systems that are specifically intended to provide competitive advantages to organizations. Keep in mind, however, that it's the processing and use of information that makes these systems strategic, not the hardware and software. After the focusing story, the chapter discusses the strategic planning process. Then 4 frameworks for identifying opportunities for strategic information systems initiatives are described. The 4 frameworks are Information Systems SWOT Analysis. SWOT stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats. Porter's 5 Competitive Forces. Porter's Value Chain Analysis, and the Virtual Value Chain. You may have heard about these in some of your other classes. Once potential strategic information systems initiatives are identified, they need to be evaluated. The chapter discusses 2 common ways for evaluating strategic initiatives: the critical success factors approach and the priority matrix. The chapter closes by discussing hyper-competition. Here are the main points made in Chapter 13. Information systems can help provide competitive advantages for organizations. Information systems that provide competitive advantage are called strategic information systems. Identifying potential strategic information systems is done through a strategic planning process. Following such a process improves communication, coordination, and decision-making. There are many ways to perform the strategic planning process. The one described in the text involves 5 phases. First is strategic business planning, which is a process by which executives set the strategic direction for the business. This is critical for IS strategic planning because the use of information systems must align with and support the organization's overall strategy. Next up is information systems assessment. This phase determines the current state of information system resources. The information system vision phase develops a broad statement of how the organization should use and manage information systems for strategic purposes. The information architecture phase determines how information system resources should be used and work together. The strategic initiatives identification phase is the final phase. In this phase, you identify which specific strategic information systems initiatives should be pursued. Frameworks are useful for identifying strategic information systems opportunities. The book covers 4. SWOT analysis analyzes strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing an organization. Once these are identified, you can look for ways that information systems might take advantage of strengths or opportunities, shore up weaknesses, and mitigate threats. Porter's 5 competitive forces analyzes an organization's competitive position within their industry. The 5 forces are industry competitive rivalry, threat of new entrants into the industry, bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of buyers, and the threat of substitutes to a company's products or services. As you might have guessed, you need to read the book for more details. Porter's value chain analysis, Michael Porter's a really smart guy, involves identifying all the activities that an organization must perform to carry out its business. There are 2 categories of activities. Primary activities directly relate to the creating, processing, or delivery of the company's products or services. Support activities are tasks that must be carried out, but are not directly involved in the product or service. Human resources management is a good example of a support activity. Virtual value chains, a related framework, examines activities that turn raw data into useful information. It's useful to have an organized way of evaluating strategic initiatives. The book covers 2 popular ways. Critical success factors are the small number of important things that must be done in order for an organization to survive and be successful. In short, these are the things that you really need to get right. Once the critical success factors for a business are identified, managers can match potential strategic information systems to the critical success factors. Initiatives that do not support critical success factors should not be priorities. The priority matrix classifies initiatives along 2 dimensions: the potential returns and the effort required to carry out the initiative, which might include costs, complexity, time, and labor. This creates a 2x2 matrix. Initiatives that require low effort and have high returns should be your top priorities. This is easier to understand if you can see an example, so check out the book. Because the competitive landscape changes so quickly today, some people believe that it's impossible to sustain competitive advantage for very long. This is the concept of hyper-competition. Richard Devaney developed a framework that can be useful to identify strategic information systems in hyper-competitive environments. All right, that's it. So I'm not going to dig into any more details here. Instead, you know what's coming, don't you? Read the chapter. All right, that's it for this time, and that's it for the book. So maybe I'll talk to you later, maybe I won't. In either case, I hope you got something out of the podcast, and I will maybe talk to you next time. Bye.